Today, our scripture reading comes to us from the Old Testament book of Isaiah, the 61st chapter. We'll begin reading in the first verse. Isaiah 61, beginning in verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit. They will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, to display His glory. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Back in 1824, something significant happened in Vienna. In 1824, in Vienna, Beethoven conducted the premiere of his Ninth Symphony. Now, if you're a lot like me, you probably can't hum 1 through 8. And maybe you're like me and weren't really sure there was a ninth. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, we hear about that. But the rest, we may not be as familiar with. But we actually know the ninth. Whether we know it or not, we do. Because the last movement of the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven is called Ode to Joy. And so whenever as a congregation we sing, joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love, that's from the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven. So it really was one of the most anticipated musical events of the year or of the season, whatever. But there was a problem in the creation of the Ninth Symphony. What delayed it, what made many think it would never occur. And that is, by the time he began writing the Ninth Symphony, Beethoven was considered, the diagnosis was profoundly deaf. He barely heard any noise whatsoever, and most think by the time of the premiere, he heard no sound at all. But there he was, conducting. He could feel the vibration of the orchestra and the choir and the soloist. He could feel the vibration of what they sang and what they played, and he got so excited about it. Those who were in the orchestra said he would get so emotional in moments that he would stand at his full height with his arms above his head conducting, and then he would get so emotional about it, he would drop down almost in a crouched position, still conducting. They admitted that it was really a lot to watch, a lot to try to follow, and someone else began conducting the orchestra and the singers, and they watched that person. Not really Beethoven, because he was just so into the music, the vibrations that he was feeling. But when it ended, he stood there, facing the orchestra, facing the choir, facing the soloist. He just stood there. He didn't know how his creation had been received until one of the soloists walked over to him and turned him to face the audience. And when he turned around, what he saw was everyone there were on their feet, and they were cheering. They were waving their handkerchiefs in the air. They were weeping, tears pouring down their faces. He couldn't hear the music, but he could finally see its results. And something happened in that moment. Beethoven, who had become so hard through the latter years of his life, suddenly softened and tears filled his eyes. The man who had grown to live in silence, who had actually written letters to friends and family talking about how much in despair he was every day, who had actually shared with people that he contemplated ending his life because of the loss of his hearing and what that might mean. That man discovered that beauty can be born from brokenness, that the symphony of his heart could reach the hearts of others to the point where they would stand and cheer and weep. That's what happens when God touches our hearts. We may not see it coming, we may not hear it coming, but suddenly God reaches into our lives and touches us. Last week we talked about how God, in the Advent season, God comes and turns our world upside down, but today we take that message even deeper into us. Because you see, before God can transform your world, the first step is that God has to transform your heart. God has to touch your heart with His love. And I think that when we read this passage from Isaiah, the thing that stands out to me is this great reminder that what breaks us doesn't have to define us. But instead, what breaks us, God can use to refine us and to reshape us into the people He knows we can be, into the lives that He knows we can live. It's a powerful passage and a powerful reminder that we need this Advent season. And you see, before we really get into Isaiah 61 and all that God says there, let me share with you why it matters, because again, like me, you may not have a vast knowledge of the symphonies of Beethoven. You may not remember this passage from Isaiah. You may remember it from somewhere else. Because you see, a few centuries after Isaiah wrote these words, after God gave the words to him, a few centuries later, in a little village called Nazareth, a rabbi walks down to the synagogue one Sabbath. This rabbi named Jesus goes into the synagogue on a Sabbath, and as a rabbi, he is offered the opportunity to speak. He walked forward, and the attendant of the synagogue handed to him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He took it and he placed it on top of a stone in the front of the synagogue. The stone was actually carved to look like the temple in Jerusalem. Even in little rural Nazareth, you had that reminder of the temple. And Jesus rolled through the scroll until he got to this passage, Isaiah 61. And he began to read to the people. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives and release from darkness to the prisoners. When he finished reading, he rolled the scroll back and he handed it to the attendant to put back away, and then he sat down. That's what rabbis would do before they shared an important teaching with people. He sat down and he looked at the congregation before him and said, "Today, this has been fulfilled in your hearing." With those words, in that synagogue, talking about this passage from Isaiah, he announced that the miracle that God had been planning for centuries was beginning. That all that God had been working on and working toward had started. It wasn't a political message. It wasn't a social program. This was an invasion of God's grace into every wounded and imprisoned and mourning heart on our planet. I mean, notice who this message is for. He says it's for the poor and the brokenhearted and the captives and the prisoners and those who mourn. He's saying that the message of the Messiah, it's not just for the people who have it all together. It's not just for the people who have perfect families and successful careers and who live these Instagram-worthy lives. No, he says this is good news for everyone. Everyone. Even people like us who struggle sometimes. Even people who struggle all the time. The message is for us. I mean, think about it. For the poor, good news. In a world that celebrates wealth and power and influence, God has a special message for those who have nothing to offer except their need. He says you're not overlooked. You're not invisible. I see you. I care. For the brokenhearted, it says they will be bound up. The Hebrew word there, it's talking about a wound that's still open, that's still fresh. God doesn't just acknowledge your pain. He says He's come to bind it up, to wrap it up, to tend to it till the hurting stops. For the captives, freedom. For the prisoners, release. And that's not just physical chains, but it can also mean every prison that we build for ourselves. Every chain we sort of shackle ourselves to. Addiction, fear, anxiety, shame, regret, unforgiveness. These things that hold us back and hold us in. Freedom, release. And then this beautiful phrase, to all who mourn, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. Beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, praise for despair. That's not renovation, that's transformation. There's this beautiful story about a woman named Maria. Maria grew up in a home that it's probably hard for me, it's probably hard for any of us to imagine. She grew up in a home where every single day she was told that she was worthless. Every day, someone in that family system reminded her that she was a mistake. And they told her that she would never amount to anything. That she was lucky that anyone put up with her at all. By the time she was an adult, she had internalized every bit of that. She stayed in abusive relationships because she believed that, well, that's what she deserved, the torment they gave. She sabotaged opportunities that came her way because she was convinced, well, they'll fail anyway, so I might as well make them fail. Then I can just own it. She wore her shame like a garment she couldn't take off. And then one day, someone invited her to church, and she did not want to go. She didn't see any need. She almost didn't go. But finally, something kept pulling at her, and finally she showed up. She made it all the way in to the very back row last seat. And that's where she sat down, and that's where she sat holding everything she brought with her. She didn't relax because at any given moment she could bolt. That was the plan. She sat there ready to leave, waiting for her moment. when the preacher stood up and read from Isaiah 61. And then the pastor started talking about that part, about God binding up the brokenhearted and giving beauty for ashes and praise for despair. And Maria sat there holding her stuff, and she started to cry. Not just that, dignified looking little one tear down the side kind of thing. No, full body racking, weeping, crying. For the first time in her life, she heard that someone saw her. That God saw her brokenness. He didn't look away in disgust. Instead, he moved toward her. That he wanted to trade her ashes for a crown. That was a transformational moment for Maria. It's been probably over 15 years now since that day. And today, Maria runs a nonprofit for women who are escaping domestic abuse and violence. She traded her garment of despair for a garment of praise. And every day she helps other women make that same trade as well. That's what God does. God turns victims into victors. God turns the broken into the brave. I mean, here's something important about Isaiah's vision. When Isaiah first received this from God and shared this with people, it would have scandalized the religious people of his day. I mean, Isaiah lived in a culture where poverty and suffering were seen as punishment for sin. If you were sick, well, you must have done something wrong. If you were poor, then you're poor because God is displeased with you for some reason. And if you were a captive, if you were in prison, well, that's what happens to sinners. That's what they all thought. And here comes God showing up and saying through the prophet Isaiah, I can see, and I'm actually paying attention to the people that you've written off. The ones that you've labeled, the ones that you've judged, the ones that you've abandoned, the ones you've turned your back on, the ones that weren't worthy of your time. I see them, and I care. Well, this message is still scandalous today. I mean, we live in a world that celebrates success, and it celebrates the beautiful people and the powerful people. But God keeps showing up in places where those kind of things really don't matter. God shows up in hospital rooms, in homeless shelters, in prison cells, and rehabilitation centers. And God shows up when we are at the end of our rope. And God shows up when we are at our wits' end. And God shows up when it all falls apart. And God shows up in all those moments. I mean, here's the good news for us all. We don't have to be perfect, and we don't have to be whole for God to welcome us and to love us. But God doesn't want us to stay broken and to remain unchanged. He loves us too much for that. God meets us where we are, wherever that might be. However good that is or however bad that is, God meets us where we are. But He loves us too much to leave us there. He knows that we are created to live a life of purpose and to live a life of significance. And so He wants to work in us to help us find that place. That's why Christmas isn't just the birthday party for Jesus. It's the announcement that God has come into our world in a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. He's come into our world to change the human heart. When the angels announced the birth to the shepherds, they said, I bring you good news of great joy, which shall be to all people. The same language Isaiah used. Good news. Good news to the poor. Good news to the overlooked. Good news to the overworked. Good news to the lost, and good news to those who are wandering, and good news to those who are questioning, and good news to those who are struggling. Good news. Mary, Jesus' mother, sang about this before Jesus was even born. She said, He filled the hungry with good things. He has helped His servant Israel, remembering to be merciful. Christmas is God saying to each and every one of us, I see you. On your good days, I see you. On your bad days, I see you. I see your broken heart. I'm coming to bind it up. I see your prison, and I'm coming to bring the key. I see your ashes, and I'm coming to bring a crown. The baby in that manger was God's answer to every heart that has ever cried out for hope and healing. So as we continue our Advent journey, as we continue moving our way toward Christmas, here's our opportunity. First, bring your brokenness to God. Stop pretending that you have it all together. He knows the truth. Stop pretending and performing. Well, stop performing for God like He doesn't already see behind your I've got it all together mask that you're wearing. Tell Him about the broken places. Talk to Him about the wounds, the hurts, the needs, the struggles. He's not going to be shocked. He's going to help. And the other thing we can do this season is we can be a heart healer for somebody else. You see, God doesn't just give us hope and heal us so that we can simply feel better. That's great, but that's not all. He also helps us and heals us so that we can go and offer that to somebody else in His name. Think about one person this week whose life you could touch. One person who's brokenhearted right now. One person who's mourning right now. One person who is captive or in prison by decisions they've made, indecisions that they have omitted, whatever it might be. What could you do this week to bring them good news? Doesn't have to be big. It could be a phone call. It could be a text. It could be a meal together. It could be a listening ear. It could be a simple, I see you, and I want you to know that you matter to me, and you matter to God. Remember, what breaks you doesn't have to define you. God can use it to refine you into the person that He knows you can be. Your past is not your prison. Your wounds are not your identity. God can make you into something beautiful if you let it. O come, Emmanuel. Let us pray. Lord of broken hearts, we come to you today with our wounds and our weariness. Some of us have been carrying ashes for so long, we've forgotten what a crown feels like. Some of us have worn garments of despair so long, we've forgotten we could wear anything else. Thank you that you are the healer, the redeemer, the one who trades beauty for ashes. Thank you that Jesus came not just for the whole and the perfect and the got it all together people, but also for the rest of us. Thank you that our weakness doesn't disqualify us, but we are always qualified to receive your grace, no matter what we're facing, no matter what we're experiencing, no matter what we're doing. This Advent, work on our hearts. Remove the shame, remove the fear, remove the anxiety, bind up the wounds, and then send us out to others to share the good news of what you can do.